They say a church confessional is sacred, a place where sins are forgiven, not borne. I shouldn't be saying this. Priests exist to bury temptation, not to share it. But if forbidden love touches your soul the way it touched mine, subscribe to the channel now, because if I could go back, I never would have done that. At first, I thought it was just another confession, until she whispered my name, and in that moment, my blood ran cold, because her greatest sin was me. As a priest, I had heard countless voices over the years, each one trembling with guilt, each one begging for mercy. That night, I believed it would be the same until she entered. Her footsteps were soft on the chapel floor, but her presence carried a storm. Something about her already felt different. Her voice was low, broken by the silence, as she began to whisper her sins. At first, they were ordinary: envy, anger, lies spoken in fear. But then her words grew heavier, drenched in something darker. She confessed desires that burned her even as she prayed. And the more she spoke, the more my heart raced. I drew closer, catching my breath, until her voice faded to a whisper I could barely hear. "Forgive me, Father," she said, "for I have sinned, and I cannot stop wanting you." My body froze, my chest tightened as if the very walls were closing in. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. But then she repeated it, her words trembling but firm, like a secret that could no longer be contained. "You," she said again, and in that instant my world shattered. Every vow I had made, every boundary I had sworn to protect, suddenly felt like paper before a flame. "Your greatest sin was me. I shouldn't be telling you this. Priests exist to silence temptation, not to confess it. If I could go back, I never would have done it." The morning after her confession, I tried to convince myself it had been a mistake, a weakness born of restless thoughts. I repeated my vows as if the words could shield me from the memory of her trembling voice. But no prayer was strong enough to erase her words. They clung to me like incense in the chapel, refusing to fade, burning deeper with every breath. When Mass began, I saw her in the pews. Her presence struck me harder than the sound of the church bells. She did not bow her head like the others. Her eyes searched for mine, unafraid, unashamed. And when our gazes finally met, I felt the weight of her confession again. Desire does not bow to holy silence, it dares to defy it. I raised the chalice, whispering words that had once been pure, yet my hands trembled as I held it. She smiled then, so faintly no one else would notice, but enough to undo me entirely. It was not a smile of innocence but of recognition, a secret smile that told me she knew the effect she had on me, and she reveled in it. The hymns echoed through the vaulted ceiling, voices blending in devotion, but none of it reached me. My prayers turned hollow as her image filled my thoughts, breaking through every wall I had built. I was not worshiping God in that moment, I was worshiping her. My soul betrayed me as my eyes betrayed my vows. The altar had once been my refuge, my place of strength. But with her there, it became my cage, trapping me between heaven and sin. And though I tried to fight it, I knew the truth. I wanted to be caught, because with every stolen glance, I felt the fire growing, and I feared that soon, it would consume us both. Night fell like a verdict over the empty chapel. I delayed locking the doors as if mercy might arrive late. Footsteps brushed the aisle, soft, determined, inevitable. Before she spoke, I already knew it was her. My resolve loosened like a knot pulled by shaking hands. "Father," she whispered, and the title cut deeper than my name. This was not absolution she sought, but hunger baptized in secrecy. Her eyes did not plead. They invited a sin with trembling dignity. My name hovered between us like a spark seeking oxygen. The chapel seemed to breathe, and every breath was ours. I told her to leave, to save herself from me. The words sounded holy but felt hollow in my mouth. She stepped closer, and the distance confessed what we would not. The air tightened, fragrant with wax, rain, and fear. Something inside me woke, and it knew her touch already. She spoke of nights begging God to erase me, of prayers that returned like waves to the same shore, of silence where answers should have been, of my sermons haunting her more than her sins, of my shaking hands at the altar, which she always saw. I stepped back, thinking distance could redeem desire. She followed, as if drawn by a vow we never made. Candlelight drew borders we pretended to respect. A door clicked softly, and in that instant I understood we were not alone. The storm outside pressed against the stained glass windows. Lightning carved shadows across the chapel walls. She stood so close I could feel her breath tremble. Silence fell heavier than the toll of church bells. Desire waited between us, sharp as a blade. Her hand rose slowly, uncertain yet unstoppable. Fingers hovered, trembling, then brushed against mine. The world collapsed into that single stolen contact. It was not touch, it was confession without words. And in that moment, every vow fractured inside me. I should have recoiled, demanded she repent. Instead, I felt fire crawl through my veins. Her thumb traced the map of my palm. Each line burned like scripture rewritten by sin. I closed my eyes, drowning in forbidden prayer. The candles flickered, as if scandal breathed on them. The chapel smelled of wax, rain, and temptation. Her skin was softer than faith, rougher than doubt. She whispered nothing, yet everything was said. I belonged to her hand before my soul obeyed. The first touch was never meant to last, but it stayed, carved into my flesh and spirit. A boundary crossed, irreversible and final. A spark lit, promising an inferno ahead. And I knew we had just stepped into the fire. Rain lashed against the chapel windows like a warning. Thunder rolled above as if heaven itself protested. She stood before me, lips trembling with desire. Her eyes begged for sin disguised as salvation. And I, a priest, stood powerless before temptation. I whispered her name, hoping restraint would return. But my voice broke under the weight of longing. Her breath mingled with mine, hot and fragile. Her hands gripped my robe like anchors of sin, and her lips hovered close, erasing every prayer. The kiss came like fire striking dry wood. It devoured silence, shattered vows, consumed restraint. Her mouth was both heaven and hell at once. My hands betrayed me, pulling her closer still. Our sin became flesh, undeniable and alive. When our lips parted, the chapel felt changed. Candles swayed, shadows danced, walls held our secret. Her eyes glistened with both guilt and triumph. I saw no sinner, only a mirror of myself. We were both condemned and we both wanted it. That kiss was not an end but a beginning. It sealed our fate in ways we couldn't undo. Once you taste the forbidden, nothing else compares. I knew redemption had already slipped from my grasp. And yet, I longed to sin again. I thought the night belonged to us alone. The kiss lingered on my lips like holy fire. But then a sound echoed in the silence. A floorboard creaked, faint but undeniable. We were not alone in the chapel. Her eyes widened, fear drowning the glow of desire. I froze, listening, heart pounding against my chest. Someone had seen, or worse, had heard. The shadows stretched, holding secrets we couldn't control. A sin confessed is dangerous, but a sin witnessed is fatal. We pulled apart, breathless, shaken, guilty. She whispered. Who was it? Who knows? But I had no answer to calm her fears. The silence screamed louder than any accusation, and every second felt like judgment closing in. I wanted to protect her, shield her from scandal, But I also knew one truth I couldn't escape. Our secret was already slipping through trembling hands. Every story of forbidden love ends in ruin, and maybe ours had just begun its fall. If your heart races with this secret as mine does, subscribe now, because the next chapter will reveal what should have remained hidden forever. And once the truth begins to spread, no prayer can stop it. The chapel no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every corner seemed to whisper of betrayal. Her scent lingered on my robe like a mark. My lips still burned with the memory of hers, and guilt pressed harder than any vow I'd broken. She came again, trembling but unstoppable. "I can't stay away," she confessed with tears. Her hands reached for me like a drowning soul. I told her love was impossible, but my voice cracked. Because the truth was simple, I wanted her to. Every embrace became a battle I was losing. Her warmth erased sermons, scripture, and silence. My faith bent under the gravity of her touch. The weight of desire crushed the weight of God. And still I chose to fall again and again. Rumors began circling like vultures above the parish. Eyes lingered too long, whispers lasted too late. She avoided the market, I avoided the square. But no sin hides forever in a town of shadows. And ours was already too loud to be buried. I prayed, begging heaven for strength I didn't want. Because every prayer ended with her name, not his. Desire had become my God, my altar, my faith. And I feared salvation was already beyond reach. But still I could not let her go. The town spoke in hushed voices, but I heard them all. "Did you see how he looks at her?" One whispered. "She visits the chapel too often," another murmured. Every sentence carried poison, dripping with suspicion, and every word pushed the noose tighter around us. She came to me trembling, her eyes red from tears. "They know," she said, her voice breaking like glass. I wanted to deny it, to soothe her fears. But the truth was already written in their stares. Rumors have a way of becoming prophecy. The bishop sent word he would visit soon. An inspection, he called it, innocent on the surface. But I felt judgment already riding behind him. The weight of holy eyes would pierce our sin, and no confession could cleanse what we had done. Still, I touched her hand beneath the altar cloth. A fleeting moment, hidden yet more dangerous than ever. Her fingers clung to mine as if drowning, and for one heartbeat we forgot the world, until the sound of footsteps shattered everything. The door slammed, and someone gasped in the dark. We froze, our hearts burning, our souls exposed. It was no longer rumor, it was proof, and proof could destroy us faster than sin itself. The question was, who had seen us this time? I stepped forward, voice trembling, almost pleading. "You saw nothing. You understand nothing," I lied. But his smirk betrayed a darker intention. He knew the power of secrets in a small town, and he intended to wield it against me. Later that night, a note appeared beneath my door. "The holy man has unholy desires," it read. Every letter cut deeper than a blade of steel. It wasn't just knowledge, it was blackmail. And soon, demands would follow the threat. She begged me to run away, to disappear. "To hell with the vows, to hell with the church," she cried. Her passion was fire, but fear was ice in my veins. I couldn't abandon everything, yet I couldn't lose her. Every choice I had was already a sin. The second note came, sharper, crueler, final. "Confess to the bishop, or I will confess for you." The trap had been set, the cage already closing. Our forbidden love had turned into a weapon, and soon someone would bleed for it. The letter burned in my hands as if written with fire, and I knew there was no more time to delay, for the bishop was already on his way, and soon my sins would not only be whispered in the shadows but carved into the walls of the church itself. Every step I took toward the altar felt like walking to the gallows, and the weight of my cassock was no longer holy cloth but the chain of a prisoner who had already been judged. I wanted to flee, to take her hand and vanish into the night, but the silence of God inside me was heavier than the bells that tolled outside. I had never felt the chapel so cold, its stone walls pressing against my chest as if eager to crush me. And still, despite the fear, a part of me longed to confess, not to free my soul but to finally stop running. She appeared in the shadows, her eyes red and swollen from nights of sleepless tears, and when she spoke my name it was not with softness but with a desperate command that cut deeper than any sermon. "You cannot confess, not now, not ever," she pleaded, clinging to me as if the very walls would tear us apart if she let go. Her body trembled, and in her trembling I felt the echo of my own weakness, for she was both my ruin and the only reason I still drew breath. I tried to speak of faith, of vows, of the salvation I was sworn to protect, but the words choked in my throat and died before reaching air. In that moment, there was no God, no church, no bishop, only her and the storm we had created together. But the storm outside was gathering too, and its thunder came not from heaven but from men whose whispers had sharpened into blades. The parishioner who had seen us did not act alone. He had allies, hungry for scandal, for power, for the downfall of the man they had once called shepherd. I heard them in the marketplace, laughing softly, certain that the bishop's arrival would be the end of me, and their certainty was poison seeping into every corner of my soul. The eyes of the faithful no longer saw me as guide but as spectacle, and every prayer that rose in the chapel was heavy with suspicion. I was no longer father, no longer priest. I was prey, and the hunters were circling. That night, I resolved to confess, to bear the sin before the bishop's questioning eyes and accept the ruin that would surely follow. Yet even as I prepared my words, a sound broke the silence of my chamber. The soft scrape of parchment against stone. Another note slipped beneath the door. My hands shook as I unfolded it, and my blood turned to ice when I read the words written there, words that spoke not of me but of her. "If you confess, she will not leave this town alive." The threat was no longer against my vows, but against her very breath. And so I understood the truth I had refused to see. This was no longer about God or sin, but about power and the cruel hands that held it. My confession would not save souls. It would sign her death. The walls of the chapel became a prison, and I its captive, trapped between salvation and destruction. The bishop's arrival was no longer the only storm I feared, for darker secrets and sharper knives were waiting in the shadows. And as the candle burned low, I realized I could not face this trial alone, for a new and unholy bargain was about to be forced upon me. The note trembled in my hands long after I had read it, as if the words themselves carried a pulse, alive with malice and intent, and I realized that my silence was no longer a choice but a command from someone hidden in the shadows who knew too much. Whoever had written it did not simply threaten. They promised blood, and not mine, but hers, and the thought of her fragile body destroyed because of me carved a wound deeper than any punishment heaven could inflict. I could not protect her with sermons or prayers, for faith does not stop knives sharpened in darkness. The realization sickened me, for in all my years of priesthood I had preached sacrifice, but now sacrifice meant watching the woman I loved be torn from this world. And so I knew that I would bow, not to God, not to the church, but to the faceless enemy who held her life in their hand. The next night he came. The parishioner who had once gasped in shock at our embrace now entered my chamber with the confidence of a wolf who had finally cornered his prey. His smile was not cruel but satisfied, as though he had always known he would hold power over me. "You will not confess," he said, his tone calm, almost tender, as if speaking to a child. "Instead, you will do exactly as you are told, for the bishop's arrival will not be your destruction, but your opportunity." I stared at him, my fists clenched, my soul burning with rage, but his words dripped with poison I could not ignore. He did not want me ruined, he wanted me used. The bargain he offered was darker than I imagined. To stand before the bishop not as a sinner seeking forgiveness but as a voice that would destroy others. He spoke of corruption within the church, of secrets buried beneath robes far holier than mine, and of the bishop himself who carried sins deeper than my own forbidden love. "You will accuse him?" the man whispered, his eyes gleaming. "And in exchange, your secret remains hidden, and she remains alive." It was not only blackmail, it was conspiracy, twisting my guilt into a weapon I was forced to wield. In that moment, I saw how easily sin breeds sin, and how quickly love can be turned into a leash. When I returned to her, my heart was a battlefield of silence and rage, and she sensed the change before I spoke. I told her fragments, enough to show the danger but not the depth. For if she knew the full truth, her fear would consume her. She begged me again to leave, to take her away from the web of power and whispers, but I could not. "If we run, they will follow," I said, and I hated the sound of my own resignation. She clung to me, her tears wetting my chest, and I wondered how love, so pure in its beginning, could lead us here, to a place where even the thought of freedom was another trap. That night, as the bells tolled midnight, I stared at the crucifix above my bed. Its shadow stretched across the wall like a judgment I could not escape. I was no longer a priest, no longer even a man of faith. I was a pawn, trapped in a game far darker than forbidden desire. The unholy bargain had chained me to a lie, and the lie demanded that I destroy another to save myself. Yet deep in my chest, beneath the fear and anger, a spark of defiance began to grow. If I was to fall, I would not fall quietly. And if I was to choose between God, the church, and her, I knew which one my soul had already chosen. The day of the bishop's arrival dawned heavy with clouds, as if even heaven itself wished to shroud the truth in shadows, and the bells that rang to welcome him tolled like funeral chimes in my ears. The church filled with faces hungry for spectacle, their whispers already carving my name into scandal before a word had been spoken. She sat in the back, her veil low, her hands trembling, and I felt her fear as though it pulsed through my veins. I had been commanded to betray, to accuse, to speak words that were not mine. Yet every syllable I rehearsed tasted like ash. When the bishop's eyes met mine across the altar, I knew the hour of judgment had come, not from God, but from men. I rose to speak, my voice carrying through the silence, but the words did not follow the script forced upon me. Instead, I told of love that burned where it should not, of desire that shattered vows, of sin that was both ruin and salvation. Gasps rose like a storm from the congregation, and the bishop's gaze hardened into stone. Yet I continued, because for once the truth was no longer my prison but my only weapon. I confessed to her name, to her touch, to the nights where God was silent and only her heartbeat answered mine. And in that confession, I felt lighter, though the gallows stood closer than ever. But the parishioner, pale with fury, leapt to his feet and shouted his own accusation, desperate to twist my words into his weapon. He cried of corruption, of hidden sins within the bishop himself, and the crowd turned its eyes not only to me but to the man who wore the ring of power. The bishop's face cracked, his silence a confession of its own, and the church that had gathered to damn me now gasped with the stench of deeper betrayal. What was meant to destroy me had become a mirror, and in that mirror they saw monsters not only in me, but in the holy men they trusted. The scandal had grown into a fire no hands could contain. She rushed forward, her cry breaking the chaos, and for one fleeting moment the world narrowed to her eyes, wide with terror yet filled with something purer than faith. She clung to me as the crowd shouted, as accusations filled the air like arrows, and I realized that in the end, salvation was never mine to claim. It was hers, always hers. I had lost God, I had lost the church, but I had not lost her. And in that truth there was a strange kind of grace. We were condemned, but we were together, and no punishment could undo the choice I had made. The crowd might stone us, the bishop might banish us, but for one heartbeat we were free. The doors of the chapel burst open with the sound of soldiers summoned by the bishop, and hands reached for me with iron intent. But my voice cut through them all as I shouted one last truth. Judge me if you must, cast me into hell if it pleases you, but know this, love is no sin, and no chain forged by men can silence it. The words hung in the air like fire, and for a moment, even the soldiers faltered. I felt her fingers tighten in mine as we were dragged apart, and though the darkness closed in, my heart knew its final absolution. I had been priest, sinner, pawn, and confessor, but in the end, I had been hers, and that was enough.